Real-time Sovryn is go.
Man of Tomorrow, the Golden Stallion, Savzu, the rated R radio star, here on video for, well, not the first time, but certainly it's been a rare thing. But what's not going to be a rare thing is exactly what I'm doing right now. Now, this will also be available as an audio podcast in the Master Sovryn podcast feed. Now, that might sound like a mouthful, but I'll explain that as well. But what's happening here is this is, as you've heard from the intro, real-time Sovryn, baby. That means that, well, one, you're kind of getting me in a more real-time fashion, meaning it's not a show, it's not an episode I'm preparing necessarily for days and days or even maybe weeks, like some episodes of my larger podcast, Sovryn Tech, are. This is going to be far more stream of consciousness and, just where I come together with you almost every day. Now, there's going to be daily, I'll have daily media out in the Master Sovryn podcast feed. And sometimes that'll be a major Sovryn Tech episode. Sometimes that'll be like an Into the Void that I'm doing with the guys over at the Agora podcast, or some other episode with them, or, some guest appearance on other shows, whatever that may end up looking like, or even some key re-releases or specials that I may be doing. But bottom line being, you are going to get daily content in that feed. Now, the main show that I do, of course, Sovryn Tech, that is now available in the Sovryn Tech AI feed, which you'll get an explanation around that in an upcoming episode of Sovryn Tech. But if you just want Sovryn Tech, and that's it, just that weekly show, that's the place to go. But otherwise, if you want everything and you want a daily conversation with me, even I might have guests on here. But again, all done very real time, not necessarily live, and I'm going to explain why that won't be the case. Some Sovryn Tech patrons already know the deal around that. But this daily content, having kind of lower production and having people on again, it won't be live. But maybe in the future it will end up being live, because I don't plan on doing a ton of edits for this kind of content, and certainly not when I have guests on. Everybody, longtime listeners know how I feel about that. If someone's an idiot, I want them to sound like one. But if they're brilliant, which I would like to think the guests I'm bringing on are, I want you to hear that too, just how goddamn good they are. Just like me. Anyway, this is going to be a lot of fun, and I'm very excited about this. Part of this is possible due to equipment that has been acquired, including this microphone, including the very camera you're watching me on, all kinds of things, due to equipment that's been acquired thanks to supporters of Sovryn Tech through the GoFundMe fundraiser that I've been doing that is still ongoing. You can just go to fundraiser.sovryntech.com to do that. And then again, some people have been so incredibly gracious, and I'd be honored, by anyone else that wishes to be as well. And, we can keep taking this and keep bumping up the quality and the production values over and over again. Or, we can amplify them, right? So anyway, I'm really excited to do this. This is something I've wanted to do for quite a while. As I mentioned to patrons, and they know better than anyone, because it used to be a Patreon kind of modus operandi. It was like my goal with Patreon was to come out with daily content in the Patreon feed. Okay. And for more years than not, I was actually putting out in some form or fashion, whether it was a podcast or a write-up that I did, kind of a blog post style thing, or newsletter or something like that. I did have stuff come out, daily, at least 5 times a week, if not 7 days a week. And, so again, I'm used to this, like this kind of cadence. I can do, okay, as long as, I have the time. And I'm certainly looking to make the time here, because podcasting is the centrality of what I do. This is my quote unquote job. I like to think I'm very good at it. And I want to, ramp this back up now that, for a lot of reasons, I think we have some excellent areas of focus. So what are going to be the areas of focus for real-time Sovryn, though? Well, the areas of focus here could really be anything. I'm going to open up talking about a couple things. We'll get in some tech stuff quick, but also, it's a lot of times it might be, a single topic, kind of like a Sovryn short used to be, what I used to call Sovryn shorts, something along those lines. And, they can be anywhere from, 15 minutes to 45 minutes to an hour to who knows, maybe even longer, especially if we have guests on, and we're just riffing. It'll be, a great time that there's no reason to cut short on. So, unless our schedules, require it, obviously I'll be gracious to my guests, as I always am. But regardless, yeah, this is going to be, maybe one or two topics at points, but, there's usually a primary thrust to get into. I don't think it's necessarily going to be a Q&A style, though it might turn into that a bit. I do plan on doing live Q&As in the future, in the very near future, and these are going to be open to people, not just patrons, or at least they'll be accessible. I might do it. I'm still figuring out exactly how I want to go forward with that. But this should be accessible to a broader audience. But, I guess I'm not going to be doing Q&As on this just to close that loop, because the Q&A section is going to be a part of the main Sovryn Tech episodes going forward. And so there's also not going to be Q&As on Patreon anymore. But, your Patreon support, of course, means the world to me and has many times over kept the lights on, in a very real way, not only in the studio, but in my house. So I'm always honored by that. And for those that want to jump onto Patreon now or continue to do so, of course, just go to sovryn.patreon.com. You don't even need the tech anymore, just sovryn.patreon.com. And you can sign up there. So without digressing into an interesting subject around why suddenly Apple wants, Patreon subscriptions through the iOS app to cost 30%. I'm not going to get into that here. We might talk about that in the future on Sovryn Tech. By the way, there are going to be a few more Q&A episodes coming out only on Patreon. Okay, just to round out the month. But that then they end. So, and I want to do the live Q&As, which those used to be Patreon only. Now, the reason I'm not exactly doing them right now, and part of the reason I haven't been able to do them over the past few months, really comes down to my internet connection right now is, let's just call it, it's shit. It sucks. I mean, I could pull up, some Ookla speed test here, but I know it's going to be horrible. When I've guested on other podcasts lately and I'm doing video, honestly, a lot of times I will turn off the video, and just use audio just to make sure that what I'm saying gets out there with some degree of clarity. It's really, really bad. And eventually, I expect it to get fixed soon, because even though I live way out in the boonies of Ice Planet Zero, shockingly, where Mrs. Sovryn and I did end up, we had very fast, gigabit internet. It's just, there's like a conduit that has to get, or that's collapsed and buried. And so, a new conduit has to be laid out for a few hundred feet or whatever. So really it's just waiting on that, and then maybe things can work out better. Also, for whatever reason, cell phone service, not the best out here. I'm not complaining about that. Okay. But cell phone service, not the best out here. And so I can't always tether off my phone. Also, even though I use Google Fi, which has a very generous, mobile hotspot, on the order of like 50 gigabytes. Okay. You can go through that pretty quickly when you're doing 1080p video like I'm doing right now. So, that's not really a viable option either to use, though sometimes I have done that when I've been streaming, again, on guest appearances. So that has to get fixed, though we might have a bit of a workaround to do that so that we could do live Q&As. But I'm really excited to get into those as well. But something that I do, actually getting into some tech conversations, that's enough preamble. Let's start talking some shit, shall we? Something I do to actually mitigate, a couple things. One thing, I'm mitigating the very slow internet speeds. The other thing that I'm doing as far as this goes is I'm mitigating the system resources, particularly I'm actually using a Windows machine right now, on this Windows machine, which is not a weak Windows machine by any means. Okay. It has a Core i7 in it, 12th gen. All right. So fortunately it's not It's not Meteor Lake. We all know the crap that's happening there. But it's a 12th gen, has 16 gig of RAM, and it's a laptop where you can't upgrade the RAM. It's soldered on, which is a real pity because I could take this laptop pretty far. If I could even just add like a 32 gig stick, into it, bring it up to, closer to 40, 50 gig of RAM, whatever. And it has Thunderbolt 4, so I could hook up an eGPU to it. And, it could be, hell, I could put like an NVIDIA 4070 or 4080 or something, on it. Not that I can afford that right now, but you know what I mean. Again, fundraiser.sovryn-tech.com, folks. Should I point that way? Maybe I should point that way when I'm on video. Got to get used to that. I don't do the video a lot. Anyway, so, I could do that. And then with this it was a Deca core, right? 10 core. With this 10 core Core i7, I mean, it'd be a pretty solid machine, but 16 gig of RAM admittedly does limit it a little bit, even though I think that's still kind of like the break-even standard for, for a gaming laptop. Not that it's a gaming laptop. It also, the reason I'd connect an eGPU is it has, Intel Iris Xe, which isn't bad. I can play Age of Empires 2 and hopefully Age of Mythology Retold when that drops in September. Very excited about that. I could play those okay. Not with the best graphics, but that's okay. I don't need the greatest graphics. I just need the gameplay, right? And for it to be, smooth for the most part. Anyway, so describing all of this, the point is that this is a computer that's not, it doesn't have all the resources I could want it to have, right? But, that's something that we're doing the fundraiser for, to be able to get a computer that can handle a lot more. Regardless, okay, so what I do is, you got to understand this, like the browser wars, as I've talked about on Sovryn Tech, the browser wars never really ended. Okay. I think most people feel like, oh, well, Google Chrome just won. Yeah, I think for most people, they just won, but that still is also changing. We're seeing, record growth in usage numbers of Safari, and it's not from iOS. It's Safari on macOS. Okay. Which I applaud. I've always said, if you're an Apple user, just fucking use Safari if you can. I know Safari there's certain features that it doesn't have. Not so great about ad blocking. It does weird shit with YouTube. I understand all of these things, which, by the way, this is on YouTube. And, I'll be sharing the link for this and for the YouTube channel. It'll be, in the show notes of the podcast feed. And, I am on Instagram as well, and I'll try and get it out that way. And of course, you can just go to nwo.red to find anything, that I do. That takes you right to, a page with all the links. Okay. Just the link tree page. Anyway, so with the browser wars in mind, again, a couple years ago, maybe 2-3 years ago, I guess now, because it would have been maybe 2021. I had recommended, saying like, what's the best browser to use today? And this was coming after very strange, honestly, political statements. And then also the layoffs that were going on by Mozilla at Mozilla. I had stopped recommending Firefox as like the browser to use. Now I didn't, and I was recommending the Brave browser at that point. Okay. I still think Brave browser is fantastic, but and this is going to be a larger subject that I get into either in another real-time Sovryn, or that I get into on a proper Sovryn Tech. But, the time for Manifest v3, the latest engine, upgrade within Blink for Google Chrome is coming. And while some of the browsers that are Chromium based, or that are, Blink based particularly, are saying that, yeah, we will hold off from implementing aspects of Manifest v3 for as long as we can to ultimately allow for ad blockers to be used. And for many people, when they think ad blockers, there's only one. And I agree, really. At the end of the day, there's only one, when we're talking about web browsers, and that is uBlock Origin. It's the only one worth its salt. maybe I'll change my mind in the future when when some other company figures out some technological leap. But as it stands, I mean, uBlock Origin is just king and has been forever, and I've recommended it for over 10 years. Um, but so Brave has come out, officially and said that, yeah, we're going to hold off on Manifest v3 for as long as we can, but down the road we might not be able to, not implement it because they rely on the work that Google does with the Chromium, Chromium code base. So with that in mind, like, I can't necessarily recommend Chromium-based web browsers anymore, ultimately, because you do lose ad blockers. And ad blockers, in my opinion, are absolutely fucking essential to, to using the internet in any meaningful way. I mean, even if, ethically, you're like, well, I don't mind seeing ads because I want the website to get paid. I mean, here's the thing. Even using Safari, I was on my iPhone earlier, and, as of the date that I'm recording this, we're just ahead of the Made by Google event, which is happening early in 2024, the Made by Google event of August 13th. I was on Android Police, a site I like to get news from and that I've used for many, many years on Sovryn Tech. And I was reading on Android Police, and holy hell, like, I couldn't, okay, I can deal with the ads being on there, right? And I won't necessarily go into what I was using, to see that. And you can say, well, don't use Safari, well, no slap nuts. No matter what browser you're using on iOS, unless you're in the European Union, which has changed this somewhat, you have to use, everything is just a skin over WebKit, over the Safari browser. That's really all it is, whether it's Firefox, Google Chrome, whatever. Okay, so I was using another browser on there, but it doesn't matter. You're ultimately, again, using WebKit or Safari, which, hey, I'm supportive of WebKit and Safari, like, if I didn't make that clear earlier. All right. But what, like, ads started popping up because I wasn't actually using Safari, which I have one blocker on there, but that, again, that only affects Safari. And so, I mean, yes, you can, if you use Edge or if you use, Opera GX or whatever, like, they have ad blockers built into them if you're using those. But this is one that didn't have an ad blocker. So even if I wanted to see the ads, anyway, all that disclaimer shit to get through. Okay, when I was just trying to read the story, all I was trying to do was read the fucking story. The ads would keep loading and popping up, and it would actually move the entire web page. It would, like, move the paragraph that I was reading, like, away from the screen. And I couldn't even read the story if I wanted to. Like, it's not that they were even in the way. It's that it caused the web page to constantly keep fucking moving. And I wasn't using look, all right, I'll tell you, like, I was using the Google app. I wasn't using some wacky ass, third party, web browser that has, like, bad coding or whatever. By no means. I was using an app that so many iPhone users use on the regular. And I mean, and the reason I had is because, I work in AI as well, and I have to test Gemini often. And I couldn't read the story because, again, it would just keep moving my place in the story. It would just pop up. Oh, it's fucking nuts. So even if you want to support the outlet that you're interested in, right? Even if you wanted to do that, you're not even going to be able to read the fucking story. What's the point of supporting an outlet that you can't even read the fucking story on your phone? Give me a break, right? Okay. So this is the importance of, honestly, all of this is to get to the point that this is the importance of ad blockers, because literally the internet barely, if at all, functions, or doesn't function, if you don't have an ad blocker. Like, it just doesn't even function. You can't even use it efficaciously. So, here's the deal. My recommendation now, especially since Manifest v3 is finally happening, even though Google did try some alternative ad technologies that basically they got told, no, that doesn't work for us. It's like Hulk Hogan, getting a storyline right at WCW, and it's like, does this work for you, Hulk? And it's like, that's not going to work for me, brother. And that's basically what all these companies told Google, even though their implementation seemed somewhat promising. And I say somewhat. So, So with Manifest v3 coming, I mean, honestly, like all you can do, like Firefox, that's it. Now you could say, well, what about some of these like, smaller web browsers that, might use like the Gecko engine still, you think like Pale Moon, or there's some other ones that are based off of Firefox's code or whatever. My primary concern with them, unless you're talking about like maybe IceCat or something like that, which is backed by the Free Software Foundation, my primary concern with these things is, when you have these small development teams, just the chances of things going wrong, and it's not just about code, it's also about, personalities, right? Like what's happening with Nova Launcher lately. Like everybody's kind of freaking out about Nova Launcher with the layoffs and some other stuff. I mean, it's just like too many bad things can happen with a really small dev team. Even though I applaud small dev teams and think in many ways that's the way to go. But I'm not, ultimately, I'm not really talking about the dev teams being small. That's not the issue. The issue is, where's the money coming from? Where's the funding? And if there isn't some kind of consistent cash flow, as much as I don't want things to be done based upon profit, okay, it's very hard to rely, on something where there's very inconsistent cash flow and there's concerns about cash flow, right? So with that in mind, I mean, and hey, look, I get it. Firefox like lives and dies, honestly, on Google's, paycheck, right? On Google giving them money to be like the default search. Certainly Apple does pretty well with that too, to the tune of, $50 billion or something a year. I mean, it's crazy, however much that is. And of course, there's a huge court case going on around that. Regardless, Mozilla is, like, it's just the only option we have. It's the only alternative we really have that can give us a great ad blocker, a lot of other features, and is not going to implement Manifest v3. I think overall this is going to end up being a huge boon for Mozilla. But now here's the deal. So like I said earlier, the browser wars aren't over, right? But then what's going on? We're in a situation where I think the metrics for what people look for in a web browser are kind of skewed. Okay, like I love that there are a multitude of web browsers to choose from, even if unfortunately many of them are Chromium based. Okay, I actually really like that Edge is out there. Edge does some very interesting things, very interesting security features. I love the vertical tabs. I mean, like lots of little things. There's so many cool things that it does. And it's very good if you have a Windows, based laptop. It's very good for battery. In fact, it's the best for battery life as far as that goes. And ultimately, it seems like a lot of people today, their primary concern is what's the battery life in what I'm using. Now, part of the reason like Edge does so well with battery life, right, is it has sleeping tabs. Okay, so meaning that it deactivates the tabs, puts them to sleep, and they're not taking system resources anymore. That's fucking great, right? Not every web browser does that, but that's a wonderful thing. Okay. So, the primary concern for a lot of people, again, comes down to that, how is it on resources? How is it on battery life? And battery life seems to be, really the number one metric that a lot of people are going for. Security and privacy should be a huge deal, which is also a reason to choose Safari, because it wins on all these metrics: battery life, security, privacy. They're all there, and in a way that's better than just about any browser you can think of. Okay, but again, that's only available on Macs, right? Or on Apple products. Which, as much as I wish, I mean, I've talked about this many times on Sovryn-Tech. I used to use Safari on Windows when they made it available. What was it, up to version 5 that they made it available on Windows? I fucking loved it. Like cover flow bookmarks, give it to me, baby. It's so great. So great. But, that's not a thing anymore. And while I'm not opposed to using a Mac at all, I used to be a huge Apple fanboy way back when. Right now, a lot of times I'm either using Linux, some form of BSD, whether it's my OpenBSD machine, or I have a, Windows machine for varying reasons. And, what you got to understand, okay, and this is the point that I'm ultimately getting to, is there are browsers that are efficient, and then there are browsers that are powerful, Now, Safari, I think, is the rare case where it's kind of both. Okay. But even then, it's not necessarily so extensible in the sense that makes it powerful. Okay. Um, and that's the problem, is that with the browser wars, I think a lot of people have lost sight of their browser being really powerful. And again, are primarily concerned with battery life and maybe, what extensions does it have, right? Which, speaks somewhat to the power, but not exactly the same. So I would argue that the two most powerful browsers out there would be Vivaldi, and power in the sense that for a power user, you have a lot, you can customize it to your wildest desires, right? So you have Vivaldi, and you have, Opera is pretty powerful in what it can do, especially Opera GX, because with Opera GX, you can actually control how much RAM does the browser take. I really, really like that. You can also, you can control its CPU usage. Again, that's only Opera GX. Okay. And I think that's awesome. That's another great option to go with. Brave is good. And like I said, look, Brave made the argument about Manifest v3 saying, look, yeah, we might not be able to support ad blockers in their present form in the near future, but we have Brave Shields, which is its own ad blocker and it's built into the browser, so you're fine anyway. And that's an okay argument to make. Even though I've seen Brave Shields break sites that are incredibly important to me. So I sweat that a little bit, even though, yes, you can turn the shields off. I get it. Just nothing has the whitelist features, really like that uBlock Origin has. It's so top notch. So, but this is, again, to get back to it, the point I'm ultimately making here is that Mozilla is, Firefox is not great on battery life. It's just not. Even on Android, it's not great on battery life. But it's not meant to be. It's a powerful web browser. And that's where, in my opinion, it wins. Okay. Like, I like that it's powerful. I like, of course, that it uses its own, rendering engine, just like Safari does, right? Safari uses WebKit instead of Blink, even though, Chrome used to be WebKit. But Firefox uses Gecko, or technically like Quantum, right? They changed it quite a few years ago. I really like that. And it's what allows us to continue to use uBlock Origin, because that's really what it comes down to, is that Mozilla Firefox allows for extensions that can do things that will effectively become impossible or close to impossible on Chromium-based web browsers. Okay, now uBlock Origin, Gorhill, he came right out and said that, the developer, he came right out and said that, yeah, we have uBlock Lite that you can use that does a lot of what uBlock Origin does. But this gets into other things like the EFF's, privacy badger. And, there's so many great privacy and security features that Firefox specifically allows for that Chromium just can't and just won't, especially with Manifest v3. So, my top recommendation now is Firefox. Here's the problem. So it's a powerful web browser, right? Well, it acts like one. And it kind of has, and all of this that I was saying is really getting to this point of something that I do to use less data, right? Because even just with my shitty internet here, even just an open tab can slow down, say, like an emergency download that I need to do, or could slow down my upload speeds or whatever. And believe me, there's plenty of times where I'm going into town, hanging out at Starbucks or whatever I have to do, to do these uploads. Okay. And downloads as well, because you know me, I fucking download. But that said, okay, when I'm at home, what I got to do, and I have to be very efficient. And you can set windows to like perform on a metered, say that it's a metered connection, and then it'll stop a lot of data stuff from happening, which is actually very nice, especially if you don't need a lot of Windows features. Like saying you're on a metered connection actually kills a lot of the nastier stuff within Windows, or particularly Windows 11, but Windows 10 has that feature as well. And I'm on Windows 11 24H2 right now on the latest. That 24H2 I don't even think has become fully public. Anybody can get it if you go through the steps, but it's not like in the it's not in the main channel for downloading for everyone yet. But I've been using it and haven't had any issues. Anyway, so the feature that Firefox does, it kind of has, but it doesn't give you like a really simple control feature to it, it does have the ability to put tabs to sleep, like I was talking about with Edge earlier. Now, this is great, especially if I have to have two web browsers open, right? Like a personal one and one for work. Okay. And a lot of times I'll have a bunch of tabs open for things that I will get to later. Like I said, if I have a bunch of downloads to do, I'll save the tabs and, I'll go to Starbucks and then I'll download them when I get there, right? But I don't want those taking up all the system resources. Also, we well know, and Firefox is actually, because it's a powerful browser by design, and it's a good thing, but we all know that, web browser tabs constantly read and write to the hard drive. Okay, and if you're constantly running an ass ton of tabs, that's going to kill your hard drive, right? So, you can kind of expect that, and it can actually kill your hard drive early, as much as SSDs have gotten a lot more resilient, over the past few years. Okay. But you can actually just type in, Firefox does have a built-in feature called tab unloading. Okay. And you can just type in about, which is the command, type this into the address bar on Firefox. You can just type in about, colon, / unloads. And then a page will come up, and that page will actually show you, all of your tabs that are awake at that moment, that haven't been, quote unquote, what Firefox calls unloaded. And then you can choose to unload those. The problem is, at least as far as I can tell, okay, like I can't control which ones I actually want to unload. You can unload them one by one. I think what I'd have to do is reorder them in the top tab bar to make, number one, number two, and in the order of which I'd want to unload them. But generally, if I'm unloading tabs, I'm usually unloading like all of them, and I'm just letting a download go, or I'm using another web browser, say for work, to get all of that done. But it's a really useful feature, admittedly. A super handy feature, right? And one that, even if you're not in my situation where your internet is horrible, it also saves system resources, and particularly your hard drive. Which I think is really, really key. I mean, there is nothing worse in the computer world than when your hard drive dies. And I've had that. Oh man, I've had life-changing scenarios. One in particular I can think of where a hard drive died, and there was some really important stuff on that hard drive. Let's just put it that way, and it set me back a lot. And I even sent it off to varying hard drive repair companies, and like none of them could fix it. It was an SSD, and just nobody could fix it. So, saving your hard drive, saving those read writes, again, SSDs are getting great, especially with like the Gen 5s coming out. Gen 4 is really solid. But Gen 5, M.2 SSDs and whatever, again, way better than they used to be, but still far from perfect. So, something to keep in mind with that tab unloader. Okay, now, the other thing I wanted to talk about here. Okay, so we got all of that out of the way, and just so you know what's going on, and a little bit of tech news, and a recommendation that it's time. It really is it's time to go back to Firefox and to use that. If I had secondary, choices, yeah, Brave browser would be right underneath it, and then also, Opera, particularly Opera GX, though Opera GX is not open source completely. There are concerns to be had there. I definitely would not be using, their VPN or any of the, there's a lot of great features in Opera. Okay. But there's some where I would use Opera even has an ad blocker built into it. Okay. So, but it's not at the level that, uBlock Origin is. Okay. So, but those would be kind of the three, unless, as I've always told you on Sovryn Tech, if you're a Windows user, okay, if you're a Linux user, Firefox is already there. It's ready to go. So why not? All right. But if you're a Windows user, and you just want to use Edge, or you're going to use something Chromium based, yeah, go ahead and use Edge, and actually go through that settings page. Because there's a lot of really cool shit to turn on as far as security features go. Okay. And it's going to be great on your battery life. Right. I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if Microsoft in the near future actually does bake in an ad blocker into Edge. And the reason I say that is they already do it on iOS and Android. When you install that Edge on iOS or Android, it already has an ad blocker that you can turn on built into it for free. So I would, I would go with that, and I'm guessing they're probably going to do something similar after Manifest v3 comes in, because it's just going to be a differentiator. It's going to be a feature differentiator from Google Chrome, and that's what you need to compete with Google Chrome. But of course, if you're an Apple person, as I always say, just use Safari. Again, it's everything. It's powerful, and it's also so efficient with battery, and for many people using a MacBook is all about the battery life, the legendary battery life, and well deserved. So yeah, but otherwise, if you're wanting to go somewhat third party with things, rock Firefox. I mean, honestly, you get into the Firefox and Proton Mail, or just Proton. I don't want to confuse that with the emulation layer for Windows games for like the Steam Deck, for Linux. But Proton is in Proton Mail, Proton AG or whatever the company wants to call itself now. If you get into that Firefox Proton Mail ecosystem, I mean, you're like with Proton Pass and everything. I mean, that stuff is top notch. They're basically bringing Apple security features to like every platform. Linux, Windows, Android, whatever, it's there. And of course, Firefox, to speak on that quick, also Firefox on Android has uBlock Origin as one of the optional extensions. I've always recommended using Firefox on Android for a ton of reasons, but that's certainly a good one. Anyway, so let's get into the main thing, the thing that I actually really wanted to talk about. There was a recent episode of a podcast that I used to listen to quite a bit. I stopped listening to them a few years ago, and I think I had forgotten why. I was switching back to, as a podcaster, as I am, and someone who pays very close attention to the podcast industry, which many podcasters don't. All right. I'm constantly testing like other podcast platforms, like Spotify, like Apple Podcasts, of course, which is probably the biggest, platform-wise anyway. And of course, Pocket Casts, which I've used forever. And I was recently switching over back to Pocket Casts away from Apple Podcasts as like my primary podcast listening platform. And I have so many podcasts, saved in that, from over the years, from the past over a decade. Okay. That, and some of which I didn't, implement into Apple Podcasts because I don't really listen to them anymore. Anyway, whatever podcast app I'm using to listen to things, and sometimes even ones that I don't, I always, set it to give me notifications of when a new episode comes out for all the shows. Now, you can be particular, like which shows do you want to, but I like to get them for all of them. Okay. And it's just a personal preference. And so there's a show called Geek's Guide to the Galaxy, obviously a play on Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Phenomenal book. The podcast, on the other hand, I think it was originally done by Wired. Like Wired originally supported it somehow. I don't think it does anymore. Anyway, I used to listen to the show a lot, because I'm a huge science fiction fan. Anybody that's listened to Sovereign Tech knows that. As I've told of, the legendary days when I was literally called the king of the nerds. Okay. And was, kind of a quasi big deal on the convention circuit back in the late 90s and early aughts. I'm a huge science fiction fan, always have been. Like, it's just Star Trek and the original Battlestar Galactica, thank you, among others, have just always been a core part of my life, like fucking core. The first movie I can ever remember watching is Star Trek: The Motion Picture. And I was like 5. 4 or 5. So, to listen to a podcast and hear a bunch of people kind of roundtable about sci-fi and fantasy and a bit of horror here and there, is a lot of fun, and Geek's Guide to the Galaxy has been going for a good long while. And I think I finally got sick of it when they had a roundtable discussion and they were talking about Dune. Now, this is back, maybe when Villeneuve's first Dune book came out, Dune movie came out, and they were covering like the Dune saga, and thankfully not getting into any of Brian Herbert's or KJA's stuff, but like they were ripping on the book in the books, and I'm just thinking like, wait, what? Like, how the fuck do you talk shit about Frank Herbert's original novel, particularly? I mean, I don't know how you talk shit about any of the original canon of 6 books, right? Or what I call the trilogy of trilogies, because there's actually there's 3 trilogies in the Dune saga, right? In Frank Herbert's Dune saga, we don't talk about Brian Herbert's shit. You have the first book, right? Which most people have read. Most people haven't gotten beyond that, but most people have read that. But really, that book in itself is its own trilogy, right? It's 3 books in one, technically. And then that really, though, plays as part of a trilogy in being, Dune, then Dune Messiah, and then, say, Children of Dune. But then you have another trilogy, which, of course, is God Emperor, Heretics of Dune, and then Chapter House Dune. Now, it would have played out a lot nicer if we actually got Dune 7 from Frank Herbert himself, not the crap that Frank Herbert and KJA put out, that 2-book nonsense. Okay. We know that that's not what Frank Herbert had in mind with those books. But anyway, it's the trilogy of trilogies because it's 3 trilogies in one. But I'm like, how does any science fiction fan talk shit about these books? That blew my mind. And so when I heard that years ago, I was like, oh, like, I'm just done. I'm done. Like, what are you people talking about? Like, you can't even do that. I'm not gatekeeping either. Okay. But this gets into the larger conversation. So anyway, I saw just out of the blue in Pocket Casts the other day, it popped up and they did an episode where they had a roundtable discussion and they reviewed Robert A. Heinlein's 1961 classic, Stranger in a Strange Land, which I have argued forever is one of the 20 greatest books ever written. Okay. And I listened to this conversation and I so quickly, like inside of maybe 10, 15 minutes, because this went for, I don't know, maybe an hour and a half, maybe a little longer. But inside of like 10 or 15 minutes, I realized, I remembered, oh, this is why I don't listen to this podcast anymore. Because again, I just couldn't believe it. They were talking shit about it. And I'm like, this is Robert Heinlein's like best-selling book, and we're talking about Robert fucking Heinlein, right? Moon is a Harsh Mistress, Starship Troopers. Even his, Time for the Stars, Citizen of the Galaxy, which had a great comic book adaptation too. Methuselah's Children. So many of these incredible books, and that's not even getting into his short stories. This man's a god of science fiction. There would be, science fiction as we know it wouldn't exist without him. Now, it's true for other names as well, but he's certainly one of them. He even had when I was growing up, and for perspective, I was born in 1981. Okay. So in the 90s, he was just known as the dean of science fiction. That's just what everybody called him. And you talk shit about this book. What it made me realize, okay, or let me give a little bit more background. Okay. So I want to give credit where credit's due. Okay. So the panel that they had on were I think there's a couple of professors of science fiction who teach science fiction. Great. They actually also had, and again, I want to give credit, I believe it was one of the lead editor or the editor-in-chief of Reason magazine. So they had a libertarian on. And of course, a lot of people, consider Robert A. Heinlein to be a libertarian. Some debate on that, but he fits that mold. And certainly, me as someone who often gets considered a libertarian as well, I get it, because there's a lot of what Heinlein says that fits very much in line, just as a lot of what I say fits very much in line with libertarian concepts. So I understand, and I don't necessarily take it as derision. I actually thought it was a great thing to have somebody from Reason magazine a very or depending upon your definition of libertarianism, but ultimately recognized as a very libertarian magazine, something that came out of the Ayn Rand revolution and so on, right? I don't know what happened to Nick Gillespie there, if it was the editor-in-chief and it wasn't him, but whatever, that doesn't matter. Okay, so I'm sure Gillespie's doing fine for himself. Okay. So that was cool. And the main host of the show, whatever his name is, David Bart Kirtley or whatever, he, said that he made it a point to read the longer version that came out in 1991. Yeah, it was in 1991. I mean, this is important to get out there that a lot of people don't know. And I'm actually really disappointed because one of my primary ways to consume books today, as the very busy person that I am, and I'm not saying that is a good thing, but is to read audiobooks. Huge. I mean, I have a massive collection of audiobooks, both in Audible and personal. And I actually read, or I listened to Stranger in a Strange Land on Audible, and I felt like things were missing. But the cover for Stranger in a Strange Land that they had on the Audible version of it was clearly for the 1991 version, unedited, quote unquote, version that has like another 60,000 plus words, because it's actually like a 200,000 word book, and Virginia Heinlein, posthumously, after Robert died, was able to get that book out there. And that's the book that I knew. That's the book that I read when I was a kid. That was the version that was in stores, that was in Barnes and Noble and in the local bookstores and everything. So it's the only one you could really get at the time. But I didn't realize that in the past 20 years, I guess, there's been a major resurgence of the original version of the book being out there. And I might have a theory as to exactly why that happened, though I'm not entirely sure, but I want to keep going with this. I want to give credit to the main host of the show of, Geek's Guide to the Galaxy, that he did bring up, and he actually read for this conversation, he read the original, or the unedited cut, or the uncut version of Stranger in a Strange Land. Now, shockingly to me, this is actually a hard thing to come by. Okay, these days, it'll cost you at least double, if not over $100, the price of, the regular paperback or hardback version that's out there today. If you're watching the video, you can actually see me here. I am holding up my version of, and I mean, I could bring it really close up to the camera. Hopefully it didn't hit that, but there you can see the original uncut version of the best-selling classic Stranger in a Strange Land. Now, in 91, when I first got this book, this is the original way that it came. This is one of the larger paperback editions. But they did end up coming out with what you would call a mass market paperback, which is a smaller, though very thick, looks like a Bible, which is the way that I originally bought it. And it has on the side, it has that same cover with, Valentine Michael Smith underwater, getting the kiss from the gal and all this, very nice cover. On the right-hand side, it would have it, maybe in the video, I'll have it pop up here. That way. I got to learn where to point. Okay. It has, Robert A. Heinlein's signature in gold on the side. And, that's the cover that you actually see on the Audible version of it. But again, the version on Audible is not the uncut version. It's the original 1961 version. Some people seem to prefer that. And after listening to this conversation on Geek's Guide to the Galaxy, I think I have some understanding perhaps why. Because it has a lot less exposition, a lot less philosophy, a lot less ideology than the uncut version does. Problem is, I like that. I like the philosophy. I like the ideology. I want to hear what Robert Heinlein thinks, whether I agree with him or not. And believe me, there are plenty of places where I disagree with Robert Heinlein. But the primary complaint, so again, I'm glad that they read the uncut version. Good. Okay. But the primary complaint that came down from these people is that the book was passé or even insulting, even though this book, honestly treats women better, especially for 1961, than almost any other genre fiction of any kind, that you can think of. The women are competent. The women, the women face down danger. They don't hide from it. Their primary problem seemed to be is what they considered to be the creation of a cult in the, back half of Stranger in a Strange Land. And they're bringing up the conversation that they feel like, because Heinlein said it took him, years and years and years to write this, that he'd kind of go back and forth on it, that maybe he wrote the first half of it because that feels more like a traditional sci-fi novel. Maybe he wrote that earlier on in his life when he was a more traditional science fiction author, whatever the hell that means. The guy fucking invented the genre practically, along with Asimov, Bradbury, and others. Okay. I know there were people before them. Believe me, I know. I know. You know who you're talking to or who you're listening to. But regardless, okay. But that in his later years, his later books, just it seems like he went crazy or something, and they're asinine. I mean, I just this stunned me to hear this stuff. But their critiques seem to be, they didn't like that it basically the back half of the book turns into this like sex cult, and you find out that Valentine Michael Smith basically has the powers of like 7 X-Men, and I'm like, no, we're talking about a time of massive sexual repression. Again, this was 61. Okay, the hippie movement and shit wasn't until 64, 65. This is ahead of all that. Even though the hippie movement really loved this book, and rightfully so, as do I. Okay, but they complained about that. I think without understanding its context. The thing is, we're existing in a time today in 2024 where that sexual repression really appears to be coming back. And don't tell me it isn't, because while yes, it's in your face, at the same time, the war drums are sounding to basically put, sex back in the bottle, right? Or, put it back behind closed doors, or, put the plank of wood between the husband and wife in the bed. Really, it seems like it's getting that bad. So this book is as relevant today as it ever was. And the idea that because, Valentine Michael Smith is this human raised by Martians and has the power of 7 X-Men, so what? Like the powers that he has are completely in line, as well as the concentration on sexuality, like fits in with basically any esoteric or mystical school of thought that has come around for the past 2,000 plus years. And I say plus. And I'm saying this as a Kabbalist because they're also all a part of Kabbalah. Like, there's nothing about Valentine Michael Smith that stands at odds with Kabbalah, right? So, I was completely fucking baffled by these comments. It's like, what, he made some like overpowered person or whatever? No, Robert Heinlein, not that I think he was a Kabbalist. He certainly hung around plenty of Jews though. Okay. But not that I think he was any kind of Kabbalist, but he was basically just putting in every, all the mystical shit from the Rosicrucians to whoever, that the OTO, you take your pick. I mean, Golden Dawn, and was, putting them into this character. And there's nothing crazy about that. Like, there's no reason that can't be a part of science fiction. There's also no reason that should be seen as like overpowered or whatever, when like this is stuff that was written and considered not just that wasn't considered fantasy, but was considered quite real, centuries, if not millennia before the X-Men were ever dreamed up. Like, that all came off as very strange. And then there were a couple of other comments that kind of blew my mind. I mean, the one is that they seemed to complain. They were disappointed that this was the most popular book by Heinlein, because thankfully they at least said, yeah, he wrote some good books. I mean, I'm not going to say everything he did was great, but everything was certainly, above par of what most people write today, in the 21st century. But, they basically were complaining that, or they think that the reason this book was such a big seller was because, unfortunately, keyword, unfortunately, people care more about sex and religion than they do space travel, and that's a problem. And I'm like, well, let's see. For most people, religion or spirituality is an understanding of their place in the universe, and sex is a vindication and celebration of life. Yeah, I'm pretty sure those are the first 2 things on people's list. Like, you're really going to complain that people are more concerned about understanding themselves and experiencing pleasure than going to outer space? Are you human? And I know being not human could be considered a compliment, but in this case, I'm not complimenting you. I mean, this stunned me, that that kind of statement is like made. It's like, yeah, no, do you understand the human condition at all? Which is exactly what science fiction is about, is exploring the human condition and its relation to dramatic changes or to rapid changes and to technological changes. Got me. So, there was that statement. Then there was this weird statement that he said that his parents told him. This is the main host, that his parents told him that, and I'm sure he's a great guy. I like that he's very, shall we say, kind of progressive and whatever. And like, I don't mean to throw shade like that. But then there was this statement apparently that it was common to say back in the day, decades ago, whatever. And this guy is probably around my age, maybe a little younger. I don't know, maybe a little older. But it was common to say that, well, there are Robert Heinlein fans, and then there are Stranger in a Strange Land fans, and the two don't meet. The two don't mix. And I heard that, I'm like, who says that? Like, that's got to be such a fucking minority view. I mean, you got to understand. And this is kind of what I wanted to talk about is really just this realization that I had that, and I don't understand it. I mean, I still don't, like, I get it. But I still, at the same time, don't really understand it. Okay. But this realization that I had that let me back it up. In the 90s, okay, like when I was suddenly getting to the point, I mean, I'm in third grade, I'm reading like the Thrawn trilogy from Star Wars, from by Timothy Zahn, so I was reading big books forever. Okay. But like when I was really getting into where I was like seeking out books and it wasn't just something getting picked up off the, the aisle at Price Chopper or something, going to the library or whatever. Like the librarian, when I said, look, I like science fiction and I want to read science fiction. I remember having this conversation and they instantly recommended to me Robert Heinlein, Isaac Asimov, Ray Bradbury, and I could keep listing off names, and I'm probably going to list off quite a few more. Okay, A.E. Van Vogt. That's how I fucking found out about A.E. Van Vogt. Fucking phenomenal. They would honestly even recommend L. Ron Hubbard. It's when I got to read Battlefield Earth, which was, say what you want about, and there's plenty to say about L. Ron Hubbard. Okay, say what you want about him though, but Battlefield Earth is a kick-ass book, kick-ass fucking novel, huge. Okay, not terrible movie, one of the worst movies ever made, but book, oh, insane, incredible, bang for buck. I mean, you get 200,000 words. Are you kidding me? You get like 1 million words for like $7. it's amazing. So, but when I asked the librarian, I mean, these are the names that were getting listed off to me. Now understand, this is the early 90s, okay, maybe even late 80s, but like at that time. Like a lot of these authors, a lot of the, the gods of science fiction, they were either dead or, halfway into the grave. And I say that graciously. At that time. Right? So like, if you're going to recommend, my point is, even in the 90s, I wasn't getting recommended, quote unquote, contemporary science fiction. Okay. I mean, yeah, Dan Simmons would come up, William Gibson would kind of come up at that point. Octavia Butler, and some others. But in general, like, no, the conversation was, if you're getting into science fiction, here's where you fucking start. And Bob Heinlein was one of the places you started. Okay. And you started with all the classics. You started with all the greats. When I started going to science fiction conventions and I got to hang out with some of these gods, getting to hang out with the Greg Bears, Gregory Benfords, Harlan Ellison, who got to be, hero. And I got to, become, close with, go down the list. Okay. They're telling you, yeah, you're going to read Frank Herbert. You're going to read, you know what I mean? Like no one was really recommending, the contemporary people to me. And you could say, well, that sucks because then contemporary authors are never going to break in. Yeah, at the time, like Arthur C. Clarke was still coming out with Ranma books. He was still coming out with, books in the Odyssey series, right? Like, 3001 and whatever else. but Robert Silverberg was still like trying to bring those people in with the year in science fiction and all of that. Um, but this is my point. Like even then, when many of these people had been long gone, the recommendations were when you start reading science fiction, you start reading Asimov, Heinlein, Bradbury, go down the list. Today, it seems that all of these guys are considered has-beens. I mean, the way that they get talked about, sure, this is just one podcast, but the way that they get talked about, it's like, oh yeah, they're just products of their time and they're, blah, blah, blah. And like, I would not recommend, like the statement was literally made on this podcast. No, I would not recommend to people to read Stranger in a Strange Land. And I'm just, what? It's like, it's like Butthead saying to Beavis, no, I'm not going to tell you to settle down this time, Beavis, like, go get him. I mean, speechless. So I guess today there are people who, really do, they like, I guess they just read contemporary science fiction authors. And admittedly, like, I don't know a ton of them. Okay. I really don't. I mean, there's some names I've heard of who become kind of breakthrough successes outside of like the Kindle sphere, like think like A.G. Riddle or whatever. But to my mind, and I'm 40, how old am I now? 43. I'm 43 now. To my mind, like still science fiction really is still, Bradbury, Asimov, Heinlein, Clarke, Damon Knight, Robert Silverberg, William Gibson, yes, Octavia Butler, yes, Dan Simmons, absolutely. Tad Williams, and some of this stuff gets into the fantasy realm as well, I understand. Okay. But Frank Herbert, Roger Zelazny. I mean, I could, like the amount of names I could fucking list off to you. I mentioned Greg Bear, Gregory Benford, Werner Vinge, Lucifer's Hammer. Unfortunately, his name is escaping me right now. But, even like the Honorverse, right, from Drake, David Brin, I could just keep on going. But like none of those stories in any, and I think about all the works that these guys have put out. Some of these people have published 50 plus books, and I think about their stories. None of them feel antiquated, I guess maybe we could look at some of them and where the women aren't treated exactly as respectfully, but a lot of them still were, A.E. Van Vogt, I thought was well ahead of the curve. There are just so many, there were so many authors who have been dead for 40 years, but like their works, we don't live in their worlds. And so how could their works be, you know what I mean by that? I mean that we don't live in those futuristic societies. We don't live with their, alien ideologies and whatever else. So how the fuck can you, how can you say like that there has been and that they're not relevant to today? No, of course they can be. We don't live in those worlds anymore. Or they warned off something, fortunately, that never got implemented in human civilization or whatever. And then, it's like reading Mein Kampf in the sense that, I'm not saying that they're Hitler by any stretch of the imagination. I'm just saying it's like reading Mein Kampf and that, yeah, why do you keep Mein Kampf published? Because it's a fucking warning. Look out for when this kind of thing comes around. This is the reason that so many short stories that Harlan Ellison wrote are so important. Like Repent Harlequin said, The TikTok Man. Yes, still read that. In fact, pick up some classic collections by Harlan Ellison, like Troublemakers or Angry Candy or some of these other ones. But I think particularly maybe Troublemakers. And he always writes kind of like an intro to his short stories. And I can remember, actually, I think particularly in Troublemakers, his message in pretty much every single one of them, and as was the overarching theme of the entire book, was pay attention. And if you think people had a hard time paying attention, I mean, he clearly thought that people back in the 80s and 90s and even before had a hard time paying attention. Holy shit. How about now? How about 2024? How about the TikTok generation? Talk about not being able to pay fucking attention. Like, these messages are timeless. My point overall, two things. One, if somebody came to me and said, hey, Stallion, I want to start reading science fiction, where do I begin? I honestly, I might even say Stranger in a Strange Land. I'd probably say Dune, but I might even say Stranger in a Strange Land because it's accessible. But not only is it accessible, but it's about the very thing that, in my opinion, is at the heart of great science fiction, and that is the evolution of the human species. Bringing us to the next level where we become more empathetic and loving and better people. That's where I want to start. And I don't ever see that message falling out of favor. I don't ever see that going away. And if you spend your life like I did, all the way into your 40s, and I'm still reading the classics at times, many times even rereading them, because again, they still fucking matter. They still have so much to teach. Or just entertaining, more so than anything today, with, smartphone-addled brains. Read Olaf Stapleton. Holy hell, are you in for a ride? No one's ever written anything like that before or since. I don't understand that that's changed, because point two is apparently, like, there's this whole new corpus. And I mean, look, yeah, I've read Jeff Vandermeer. I've read some of Qian Lu or whatever. I've read modern science fiction, no doubt, but it all pales in comparison to what the gods wrote. But apparently there are people out there who think, oh, no, Asimov, old hat. We don't read Heinlein around here. Bradbury, pfft. Apparently that's an attitude. And I just, I guess I haven't been to a convention in long enough to really like test the waters on that. I'm actually, since I'm in New Hampshire, like, I'm not far from ReaderCon, which would be a great place to, go experience this. And they get a lot of, big authors and whatever that show up. I mean, Brandon Sanderson, and I mean, great author, seriously. I don't get it. Like, because I feel like even those authors would say to you, go read Robert Jordan, right? Like, why wouldn't Brandon Sanderson say that? And so I'm just baffled by this, because science fiction is the thing that, in my opinion, is always timeless. Yeah, there's fucking pulp magazine, penny written shit, that certainly is a product of its time. I get that. Okay. But even space Nazis might still be relevant today. Maybe more so than ever. Maybe. And it's a pity. More is the pity. Not the old man here yelling at clouds, but I just was so stunned, by this podcast that somehow, like, that this book is by science fiction fans, hardcore science fiction fans, people who either teach it or are doing a podcast about it or whatever, like, talk shit about the gods. That blows my mind. I mean, can we criticize these people? Of course we can. There's plenty of things to say. I mean, as much as I, worship at the altar of Harlan Ellison my whole life, there's plenty of places where I disagree with him. So that's fine. But, like, to trash their work, that's something about that is a little off. But then so much is off in 2024. I'll wrap up this real-time Sovryn with that. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you're listening to this on Spotify, actually, you have a comments section where you can put your comments there. If you're watching and listening to this on YouTube, of course, get your comments there. And anywhere else that adds comments into the future, please, by all means, get them in. I guarantee you, I read them all. And as I've been saying for well over a decade, I'll see all of you, on the other side.